Did you know that Google personalizes many searches by city and Also Asked is the only tool to access live People Also Asked data at city level? Try for free at alsoasked.com.
Tired of SEO guesswork? Quadra's AI agent goes deeper to uncover high-impact optimizations and completes hours of SEO in minutes. Get started now.
I was going to say that SEO with Fat Joe is as peaceful as this, but then the birds are all having fights.
Yo, I'm going to jump straight in. We've got one mission for today's talk, and that is to understand how people build with JavaScript frameworks in 2025 so you can SEO better. Nice and simple. What I'm not going to talk about today is like the things that we find as SEOs that are wrong with JavaScript sites. I think there's tons of stuff out there for that. And I've actually built a site that goes alongside this talk, which I'm going to put a link to at the end so you don't get distracted right now. But that has that list on it of a kind of audit of JavaScript things that might be wrong with the site. And I know there's kind of a breadth of experience within Brighton SEO. So I've tried to include some stuff for the kind of veterans, maybe a bit of a refresher, but hopefully a lot of you will learn some of the basics from this as well. So the reason I came up with this talk is that I started building with React, and this was about 18 months ago. And I'm kind of an old fogey in the web development world. I've been using WordPress for a long time. And I started building with React, and the reason that I used React is because like WordPress was just too much for me to get some validation done. I just needed something built. I worked with a lot of startups, so I basically started using React, playing around with it. I was really surprised by how actually useful it is and how I could quickly get something done. But I quickly realized that I'd forgotten most of the JavaScript SEO stuff that I thought I knew. And I'm not the only one. So last year, Sitebulb, shout out to Sitebulb, they did this study where 41% of people said they weren't sure if they read Google's documentation around JavaScript rendering. And 10% of SEOs said they perfectly understood how Google crawls, renders, and indexes JavaScript. So I think there's a really good reason for this. I think Google is pretty good at figuring this stuff out now. Like if we look back to kind of 5-6 years ago, you'd see like a single page application and your head would explode because it would be so bad. There was so much stuff that we had to do to get it right. But now Google are very good at figuring this stuff out. And that in combination with frameworks, which I'm going to talk about in a second, means that we're actually in a really good position from a JavaScript point of view. This stuff still matters. So hopefully a lot of people in the room have seen this before, probably many times. Maybe not due to those stats that I just showed you, but like this top part here is basically the HTML stuff, and the things that we care about is this JavaScript part, is the bottom part. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, read the documentation, obviously. But what we do know is that Google takes 2 passes when it's dealing with JavaScript. So this is the absolute basics of JavaScript SEO. It looks at the HTML stuff first, and then it looks at the JavaScript in a second pass, and it does the rendering part. It tries to understand that. Tries to see the content with a pretend browser, basically. So we know that stuff, and that's really important. And they are probably very good at it now. They've been doing this stuff like JavaScript rendering for a very long time now. And maybe that has made us a little bit lazier. But of course, it's not just Google anymore. And this is super important, right? So Vercel did a study last year, which doesn't have any figures on it. Google, within a month's worth of fetches, Google requested 4.5 billion resources. And the next one in this segment here, which should have a figure on it, it definitely does in my version, is 569 million, and that is GPT bot. So obviously Google is still the dominant force, and it's still the thing that we care about as SEOs, right? Like, obviously we're all talking about LLMs, and our clients are asking about them every day and are obsessed with them. But for the most part, we still care mostly about Google. And the crawl stats from AI are only going to get bigger and bigger. There's tons and tons of money being poured into these tools, right? Absolutely loads. And so these tools are trying to compete with the search engine that we've been optimizing for so long. But Vercel also showed from the same study that the results consistently show that none of the major AI crawlers currently render JavaScript. They're fetching JavaScript, but they are not rendering it. So this is super important. I think we're at a really exciting time for AI. I am kind of an optimist with this technology. Hopefully I'm going to be right. Maybe we'll see in 10 years' time when AI becomes sentient and fires a missile directly at my face. But before AI, we kind of had this stuff. We wanted to get like things done. There's no stats on this for some reason. I don't really know why. Is this going to make sense without the figures? It might do. The orange part is human beings. The blue part is time. And the black part is AI tools, right? We wanted to get things done, and we needed to use our time and our people to do that. I think the doom and gloomers are going to see AI as like this, where the tools are going to take over everything we do, and we'll be sat around in a field unemployed in a drum circle, right? I don't think it's like that. I think that actually, and this is the way that I've been working, again, people, time, tools. This is the way that I've been working for probably the past 12 months. I've just got more done using AI, and I can validate things really quickly. I can get things out the door a lot quicker. And it's really easy to get an app up and running right now. And when I say app, I mean website, as well. It's super, super easy to get this stuff up and running right now. And we need to bear that in mind as SEOs, because people are just going to be creating more and more stuff. If anyone's used Bolt before, if you haven't used this is like an AI tool where you can basically just give it a prompt and it will go away and start building something for you. The barriers to entry are extremely low. And then there's Replit as well, another example. This is like a complete integrated development environment within the browser. You could go with no code experience whatsoever, ask it to build you a website, and it will do that. And one of the things that these do is that they usually default to JavaScript framework first. So that's kind of something to bear in mind. A lot more stuff is going to be produced. I'm not endorsing these tools, right, directly. I'm just saying that these exist. I'm sure, and it's a discussion for another time. We could probably have a whole conference on whether JavaScript frameworks are better than WordPress. I'm sure there's people in the room who'd rather drink bleach than use a JavaScript framework, but I'm not endorsing them directly. But what I am saying is that we're at a point where these tools are inevitable. People are going to be using them more and more. They're just going to continue to grow in popularity. There is money being pumped into these tools, and they are producing websites at quite an alarming rate. So as SEOs, we should be positioned well to make sure they're used for good, and most of all, to make sure that they create apps that are discoverable. Like, this is basically all we care about as technical SEOs, right? Is like, can the crawler find the thing? Is it discoverable? So with that in mind, I wanted to just talk through how one of these JavaScript frameworks kind of works and some of the basics. And basically, I think that these frameworks have come a long, long way. I think the communities behind them are really good. The support that is kind of natively considering SEO is really strong. And the one that I want to talk about today is Next.js. I've been using this a lot. For those who aren't familiar with Next.js, it's built on top of React. It kind of takes the best of React and then it does stuff that it should have done in the first place. And it's got quite a lot of powerful features. Before I go into Next.js, I just want to go through a tiny, tiny history of rendering, because I'm sure there's probably some people in this room that kind of need this little bit of an intro here. And I think it's useful for us to have a refresher as well. Back in the day when the internet was early, we kind of had this thing where a client wanted a page, the page would be returned and it was HTML. It was glorious. We didn't know how good we had it. Everything in McDonald's was 99p and pints for £2. And HTML came back to us when we asked a server for it. Then we kind of needed pages being generated on the server. So we wanted to take data from somewhere else. And we wanted to put it into the page and then generate it and give it back to the client. Then we kind of wanted websites to be more like software rather than just pages of text. So we wanted to add interactivity. And now we've got all of this. So roughly that translates to, in the technology, HTML, obviously not HTML5. It's just that's the cool logo to use. And then PHP, JavaScript, which is basically where all the problems come from. And now we've got all of this stuff all in one framework, like Next.js. And by the way, I'm talking about Next.js. I'm sure there's loads of frameworks that do similar things out there all at the same time. This is the one that I'm familiar with. It's also the most popular JavaScript framework as of last year. So, And we call these rendering methods, right? The sites that we build with these tools, we're trying to figure out how they render the stuff and give it to a client, which includes Google and users. And roughly these are, and I'm going to go through these and give examples. static site generation, server-side generation, client-side generation, and then Next has all of these things kind of built in. So let's dive into some practical examples. There is some code in here. Don't worry if you're not a coder. It's absolutely not important that you understand what the code does. It's more like the concepts behind it that's more important. So Next.js is server first now. This is quite important because in combination with Google being able to understand JavaScript more, with these frameworks like prioritizing server rendering first, we're naturally just going to have less issues with JavaScript SEO, I think. What I'm actually going to go through is examples of code from Next.js's pages router. Again, doesn't really matter that you remember pages router and app router, but they have two different methods, and the app router is actually the newer one. So the pages router is the example I'm using for the purposes of this because I think it's more important to understand that one. The pages router is the older version, the app router is the newer one, and the app router is even easier to do this stuff. So like, as SEOs, we should be understanding this. And then when we're having conversations with developers, honestly, sometimes it's like, how did you get this wrong? So keep that in mind because these code examples are kind of, I mean, they're stupidly simple examples anyway that you wouldn't really use in the real world, but they're all based on the pages router unless I kind of mention otherwise. Built into Next.js are loads of simple and powerful features that allow us as developers to declare how we want things to be rendered. Next.js does a lot of this stuff, like I say now with the app router, but there are methods where we can just say, please do this for us. So server-side rendering is a method where we want to get some data from somewhere else, usually a database. We want to put that all together and we want to show that to the client. That could be a user or a search engine. This is useful for things like resources pages, product pages, lists of blogs, things that we want the latest information to be updated on and given back to the client. My example site, which again, I'll link at the end, this is a list of resources. It'd be cool if you could there's a form on that site when you go on it, drop me any resources that I might be missing. That's the kind of purpose of this page. With Next.js, we can use something called get server-side props in the pages router, which literally is basically saying, it's kind of like, does what it says on the tin. It's like, so use the server-side rendering method to get my properties from the top part here, and then put that into the code and display that to the user on the server side. Pretty straightforward. Use server is something we can now use. I'm not going to go into detail on this at all, but this is something we can now use in the app router to literally explicitly tell a component to be rendered on the server side and deal with the logic on the server side. And Next will just deal with all this stuff. I have no idea how this works in the back end. I don't know if anyone does, but it's like that. It's that simple to say, I want this component, the logic of this component to be dealt with on the server. Client-side rendering is obviously where most of the issues come from with JavaScript. This is when everything is rendered on the browser side, and that is what Google is trying to figure out, right? It's like it uses a headless browser to see the content and like try and figure out what's going on. But with client-side rendering, really, we should be using this for things that don't need to be indexed by Google, right? And the example on my accompanying site that I've got is a checklist of things that might be wrong with a JavaScript-based website that we can run through. This, you can move stuff around, you can tick it off as complete, you can see your progress. If you close the browser window and come back, you can still see the progress because it's stored in local storage. It's great, it's an application, right? It feels like a piece of software, and we should be using this stuff. When you use the React hooks, use effect or use state, Next will immediately deal with that for you and say, like, this is going to be rendered on the client side. Keep that in mind. And then there's this use client, which is, again, this is the from the app router side of things, so the newer version that came out like last year. So I'm sure there's probably lots of sites out there that aren't using this, but what you can do is you can create a component. So this is a stupid example, but obviously it's like a counter. We don't need a counter or a tool to be indexed by Google, right? But what we can say is use client, because then all that fun interactive stuff is dealt with by Next, and I'm going to come back to hydration in a second, so keep that in mind as well. And then static site generation it's not a competition, but this is the best method. Like this is when you want informational content, that is stuff that you really want to be indexed. The stuff that doesn't change that often, so probably doesn't need like an immediate rendering as you're requesting the resource. The example that I've used on my site is this cool, like, nerdy history of web technologies, which is super fun to put together. But for your clients, it might be like about pages, things like that. And then you'll have evergreen content. I hate that word so much, but you have evergreen content that is like stuff you want to stick around. It's really like authoritative, and that is rendered at build time by Next.js. So you build your app, you put that on your host, and almost like before it goes on the host, it's not as simple as this, but before it goes on the host, it's rendered and built as if it was like an old school piece of HTML. Sick. And get static props is the pages router version of this. So you're literally saying, get my properties using a static build method and stick them into the content. Hydration is not a form of rendering, but this is something that's really important for Next.js. And I think I'm going to make another point about this in a second. But again, using this use client, what we're saying is this component that I've created, please render it on the client side. But what Next.js does, it doesn't go, oh, I'll give it all this JavaScript stuff and then we figure it out. It says, right, we've got HTML on this page, but one of the components is JavaScript. You add that as a component, and Next.js deals with this for you. It says basically, okay, one of these parts of this page is JavaScript, but we're going to serve first the HTML properly with a lovely proper method that it should be. And then we're going to hydrate that content with the JavaScript afterwards. So when you look at pages that have like use client on them, web performance wise, this stuff flies like out the box. You basically hardly have to do anything because of this, because Next.js is saying, stick this component in afterwards. And that's called hydration. So that's not a rendering method, but it's, another thing. There's also incremental static regeneration. I'm not going to talk about that. Next.js now, in the app router, renders static by default. So as I mentioned previously, it's server-side by default, but it will give you a list when you build your app of like, these are the pages that we think should be rendered statically, and these are the pages that we think should be rendered dynamically, which again is like really good for SEO, right? Kind of out the box. So the guys at Vercel, Next.js is built by Vercel, by the way, if you didn't know that. The guys at Vercel are really working on this stuff to be like, let's make this indexable first, and it's out the box, kind of rendering itself as if it was a website from the 90s, which is pretty sweet. Yeah, out the box. So why should we care about this stuff as SEOs? There might be an argument to say, like, if Google deals with this stuff already, who cares? I think from a performance point of view, we need to think about it. I think potentially from an environmental point of view as well, like, do we really need to render extra stuff? But most of all, I think technical SEOs should encourage the creativity in content, right? Like, as technical SEOs, we're often seen as like these kind of box tickers, like the bunch of nerds that just go, oh, here's everything that's wrong with the site, and then we try and fix those things that's wrong with the site. But actually, we're best placed to work from the start of a project with a development team to make sure that they know the different methodologies that they should be using on each different page before the content is even created. Or you might have an example that I used recently. A client had a really nice piece of content that was all about like monetization on YouTube, and their business is primarily aimed at creators, another word that I hate. And it was indexed, it was doing really well. We got to page 1, and then we thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we just added a calculator that you could, put in your followers, put in your stuff, and it would show you straight away. You don't need to index that stuff, right? Because that's not, the functionality is not what we're trying to index, the words are. So then you can just use client, create that component, put it on the page, and you don't really have to worry about the performance that much. But as technical SEOs, we're the ones that should be saying, like, let's do this extra stuff, like, that's fun, interactive, creates, better content overall. And really, you could argue at the moment, now we know that these crawlers, these LLM crawlers aren't rendering JavaScript. We could argue that really the only main thing that's different about generative engine optimization versus search engine optimization is JavaScript, because they're not dealing with this stuff. They're not rendering it. And I had an interesting conversation last night, which somehow I can remember, with Patrick from Sitebulb. his theory is like, are they even going to bother? Like, do they care about this? All they care about is text, right? They're trying to consume all this text and build their models with it, help their models learn. Are they ever going to care about this stuff? Maybe not. So that for us is even more important, because we need to think about the pages that we're creating, the content, like what is rendered with which method, and how can we actually enhance that? So that's me. Visit the site. There's a QR code up now. Basically just created this site to go alongside the talk to demonstrate each method, kind of for myself to validate it as well. But there's a resources section on here as well, which I'd really like it if people could add resources to. Give me a shout. I'm going to build this out. I'm going to put a new section on it and have a section that's aimed at developers as well. So I'd appreciate any feedback. Please don't do a JavaScript audit on it though. Yeah, that's me. Cheers.
Demand sphere. Limitless visual insights from the SERPs. Unlimited dashboards and users. Easy to use and easy to scale your growth to new levels.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.